Sex workers of Reddit, have you ever fallen in love with a John? What happened afterwards? I did a short stint as a stripper. One night I had an odd guy come tip me while I was on stage and kept trying to get my number. After I got the guy to leave me alone, another man got out of his booth and threw $20 at me, praising me for how I dealt with the weirdo. I finished my set on stage and sat down with the guy to thank him and chat. He had his boss in the booth with him, and it turns out his boss loves anime as much as I do, so we hit it off. I was a part-time stripper, so my schedule was inconsistent, but boss man always tried to come by and buy me drinks and just chat. He never wanted a lap dance or to go to the back room. Always just wanted to have conversations with me. We talked about anything and everything. We were the same kind of weird. We exchanged numbers shortly before I abruptly left the industry and disappeared for months to try and repair the crappy abusive relationship I was in, but we never texted each other. When I was in a dark place surrounded by unsupportive people, I texted him out of the blue asking if he wanted to hang out. He was so excited. According to some of the dancers that worked at the club, in the months after I vanished, he would check every weekend to see if I was working, and when he didn't see me, he would leave. In any case, one date led to another, and now we're engaged. We're still working out the perfect alibi for our families on how we met, but most of our close friends know the whole story. Story 2. I worked as a stripper and fell in love with the manager. I saw girls always fawning over him, leaving some tips on stage so he would bring them back to the dressing room and they could flirt with him. I assumed it was a phase and tried to ignore my feelings. At the time, I was suffering from chronic pain and an eating disorder. He just cared so much and went out of his way to help. We've been married for 15 years and have 3 children. Story 3. From the customer side, I was in a relationship with a sex worker, one of the best in my life. We met, as you would imagine, but without going into too many details, she was different, and I soon became obsessed. I would see her every chance I got. I was living in another country at the time, so had no real friends, and she helped me with a lot of things, getting an apartment set up and stuff like that. I hoped we were heading for more than just a client/customer relationship, but I didn't want to jinx it. One day, she didn't take the money I left out, and when I pointed that out, she got upset and basically told me I was an idiot for not noticing that we were now in a relationship. She was a sex worker for a few months and mainly had regular, but after that, it was just me and her. I loved her, and I know she felt the same way about me. We were together for a little over a year, and even when we broke up, we stayed friends. That was over 10 years ago, and we stayed in touch after. We have been on holiday together since. She has visited me at home. She has now moved back home, is running a successful business, and is getting married soon to a guy who really looks after her. I still care about her, and I'm really glad that she's happy. Story 4. I was a sugar baby the moment I turned 18. Started sleeping with a 60-year-old doctor. I was poor, so the constant showering of gifts, money, dinners, vacations, and clothes, I guess, made me fall in love with him. All I would think about was Lonnie, fake name, and what amazing thing Lonnie had planned for us that day. One day I get a call from him and he tells me we can't see each other anymore because he had caught feelings for me. I took this as my opportunity to tell him how I felt, and I really thought we would get married. He then told me, I can't be in love with a sex worker, so I have to let you go and move on to another girl I don't have feelings for. I was broken and depressed for a long time. I ended up using some of the money he gave me for therapy, and eventually I got over it. Story 5. A friend of mine's sister and her friend were/are sex workers. They both fell in love with the same customer. The bloke was a bikie, and I'm pretty sure they loved the free drugs he gave them, not him. They had a huge blowout over this guy, and basically didn't take long before they stopped communicating. They both confessed their love for him, and he cut ties with both, because he wanted to spend more time with his wife. Story 6. Related only, but one of my friends with unlimited business expenses was hosting an NYC clients from London. That night ended up at a strip club across the street from my home and a $1,000 lap dance ticket, $20 each, in the middle of the table. I tried one, not my thing, so I pocketed 3 of the tickets as souvenirs. A year later, my nephew was visiting me as he turned 21, so I gave him the 3 tickets and sent him to the strip club. He didn't return, but called at 8 a.m. I'm making breakfast over at Dawn's place. They went out for a few months. Story 7. Not my story, but people I love and care about. My amazing daughter-in-law's mother was a phone sex worker for many years after the death of her husband. She had a heart condition and couldn't work regular jobs. Her husband, my daughter-in-law's father, ran guns and drugs in the early 90s and shot himself in the head while high on heroin in front of my daughter-in-law when she was only 2. They lived in extreme poverty after that. My daughter-in-law is a gifted artist and would draw pictures of popular anime characters for classmates for money just to buy lunch. I asked why her mom didn't apply for free lunch or food stamps, and she said she wasn't sure, but she was always hungry and their living situation was less than ideal. Her mom, we will call her Annie, became close to a client over the phone. It went far beyond typical phone sex, and they developed a really intimate relationship. Eventually, he wanted to meet her. It didn't go well. Annie had lied about her appearance. She claimed she was a former actress and beauty queen down on her luck. This was far from the truth. She was also dishonest about her health condition, and he, let's call him Bill, became very angry with her deception. He ignored her calls after the meeting. They didn't speak for several months, but he missed her companionship and truly discovered he loved her. He came back around. Bill developed a fatherly relationship with my daughter-in-law in her teens. He paid most and often all of their rent. He lived in another city and would come visit every couple of weeks. Bill and Annie never had a physical relationship, but they had a deep relationship and intimate understanding of each other. Annie died 2 years ago. Before she passed, my son and daughter-in-law moved in with us to find better jobs and cheaper housing in a different state. They have 2 beautiful children and found a place of their own. They are thriving, well-adjusted, and happy. Bill flies out every couple of months to visit. He loves my grandkids as much as I do. He spoils them rotten and truly enjoys being grandpa. I'm immensely grateful for him. My daughter-in-law has no parents or siblings, but she has us and Bill. Story 8. I'll start with my story to get the ball rolling. Former sex worker. When I was 18, I began seeking a married man in his early 40s who treated me with respect, genuinely listened, and helped me with my school. And we hung out a lot too, without sleeping together. About 4 months after seeing him almost every day, I started to become attached. Then one day I told him that I thought I was in love with him, and he told me, "I still love my wife. I only keep you around for your head game." I was devastated and never saw him again. Story 9. Not the sex worker, but the partner of one. I was going through a stressful time in my life and things weren't working out the way I had hoped. I was single and was always making time for other people and never felt like I was getting what I wanted in life. I knew nothing about sex workers at the time and had never seen one before. I did some research for about a month or so and came across this girl's ad. She seemed legit and from what I could see in her pictures, rather attractive. I booked her and was beyond nervous leading up to the appointment. When the day came, I went over and the cutest girl ever opened the door and welcomed me in. We talked about ourselves pretty much the entire night. I had only intended for this to be a one-time deal since it's so expensive, but I decided to see her a few more times. I noticed she started letting me overstay my appointment time more each visit, and I was getting suspicious. I didn't know if this was normal or if she was into me. I liked her a lot, but I figured this was her job and she probably just wanted to keep me, a steady income, around. She started doing other favors, like making me dinner, and my mind started going crazy and I had to know what's going on. So I confessed to her that I liked her and hoped that was okay, and asked her to clarify what she had been doing and what it meant. Turns out she totally had feelings for me. We decided to date, and now we're married. Story 10. I was sort of a sugar baby. He wasn't super wealthy and didn't shower me with luxury, but I was 18 and he was 40. I met him through a mutual friend who initially thought nothing of it. Eventually, we started hooking up in very dom-sub ways. He got me small gifts like clothes, makeup, jewelry. He paid for my tattoos, paid for hotel stays, Disneyland, etc. We eventually got to know each other and realized we had a lot in common and got along well. We both knew it was a fantasy that couldn't last. Finally, we admitted we'd fallen in love. I knew it would never work as he had 3 kids, the oldest one being my age and the youngest one living with him still. He was also legally married, but they were separated. Eventually, we parted ways as friends, but not a day goes by that I don't miss him or what we had. Story 11. When I was in Amsterdam, I did a red light tour, and the tour guide told us how when he was young and inexperienced, he shopped around the windows for a while, found the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, and kept coming back until he worked up his nerve. Eventually, he went in, stayed in there talking to her until like 4 in the morning, then she took him back to her place. That was 9 years before he told us the story, and they'd been together since. She still worked as a sex worker, and he was so open about everything. It was really interesting to get such an outlook from a tour guide. Story 12. Sex workers liked me. I'd strike up a conversation outside where they usually hang out, exchange phone numbers, go on a few dates. I didn't care what they did, I just liked hanging out with them. Nothing could ever progress because every time I started to get to know them, I would have to go out to see. Most strippers are different though. They try to finesse you. Talk about I'm low on rent this month or my phone was about to get cut off, and sex workers would take me out to eat at some hidden local joints and pay for the food. They liked showing me new things. Story 13. Really happy for the fairy tales people are telling here, but these stories don't often end well. I had a second-degree cousin who was a sex worker in Brazil. Started doing it as a teenager since her father left her sick mother without a penny, and she was a very beautiful girl. Worked as a sex worker for a few years and ended up meeting a Spanish tourist when she was 22 or 21. This guy was Prince Charming himself. Came back to Brazil a few months after meeting her to marry her and take her to Spain. Was really kind with the entire family, flooded everyone with gifts, and sounded like a genuine nice guy. A few months passed after their marriage and things seemed fine. She gets to visit the family, sends updates constantly. Out of nowhere, silence. She completely disappears for years. It was the 90s, before cell phones or social networks. Her mother tried to reach the police, but it was useless. After around 8 or 9 years of silence, she calls us back. According to her, the guy was extremely jealous and abusive. The first signs were weird, but nothing terrifying in her opinion. But things got worse, with physical and psychological violence, forbidding her of leaving the house until it turned into a situation where she was completely locked off. She ended up running away from home after many tries and took refuge in a church. While living at that church, she remembered one of her cousin's phone numbers, one of the few she memorized, and managed to call the family back. Most of us thought she was dead by then. That was in 2004, and she'd been missing since 95-96. Now, she's married and living in Spain with a regular man she met at the church. Story 14. I used to do security in a brothel for some extra cash in my early 20s. There was a girl working there who seemed to be trying too hard to fit into the lifestyle. It just seemed too much for her, though. She was hot. I had a buddy who used to frequent various brothels around the city. When I told her about this girl, he quickly became one of her regulars. One night, he appeared as usual for a visit. After about half an hour, he ran out the door carrying this chick in his arms. "I'm kidnapping her" was his only explanation. Apparently, she had broken down crying during the visit, and my mate decided to take matters into his own hands. They both disappeared for a few months, leaving me to explain to the brothel owner how I let one of his girls get stolen. Luckily, my buddy was well known as a bit of a psycho in the city. I mean, he wasn't a psycho, just big and really good at fighting. Other than that, he was the nicest guy you could meet. Joey kidnapped her was enough of an explanation to get me off the hook. As it turned out, he'd taken her traveling the world for a few months. They were in a steady, though tumultuous relationship for a few years after they got back, and the girl got out of the game for good. It didn't last, but they were great together for a while at least. Story 15. I'm an online sex worker. I offer pretty much every service under the sun, and one of those is girlfriend experience. It's basically as it sounds, plenty of texting and sexting. I really enjoy the intimacy it allows. I took on a client early in the year, a busy businessman bored from quarantine. We had very similar interests, both sexually and otherwise. I found out within a week that he only lived a few hours away. After building trust for a while, he came to see me. We've been together ever since. He's completely supportive of my work, and he spends a week with me, then he'll go back home and spend a week there. We're shopping for apartments in my city now, and likely we'll be moving in by December 1st. I never could have predicted this. I've always been good at being genuine and intimate without opening up that part of myself that could consider a client a part of my real life, but there was no denying it with him. He is so good to me, and it is really, really, really enjoyable. I've never been with someone into the same kinky stuff as me. Story 16. I had my first romantic encounter with another woman when I was working as an escort, and now I identify as a gay woman. I think she was a nurse or worked at a hospital. She seemed like she was really struggling with a lot of things emotionally, like she was in a pretty dark place at the time. I was too. She made a lot of comments about how she didn't really have any friends and that she was so exhausted, but she was beautiful. I only saw her that one night, which was over 6 years ago, but I do think of her often. I hope she's okay. I think I'm the age she was now, and I really don't have any friends or a life outside of work. So I feel like I can now look back on that weird night from the other perspective. Story 17. I was a stripper for a short time. A guy in his 20s had friends who worked at the club. He would sit around and drink with the girls, and I was introduced to him. He gave me some attention, and at the time I had very low self-esteem and I was worth his time or something. I really fancied him, not because he was particularly handsome, nice, interesting, or anything really. I was just really alone and felt unworthy. I would pay for everything we did. I trusted him in my apartment alone. I was at work one night when I came home, my wallet that I had hidden, but not well enough I guess, with $4,000 in tips. was gone. I asked him about it, but he denied taking it. I was naive and believed him. I heard he was sleeping with one of the girls from the club, but didn't believe it. I didn't look after myself and I got pregnant. I had a bit of a moment on stage where I cried and ran off and left. I never went back. He broke up with me over text message. I had no friends and couldn't tell my mom. I took a large dose of Seroquel and lay in bed uncomfortable for hours, not being able to sleep, but was far too uncomfortable to be awake. I was sick. Weeks later, I caught a long bus journey to get an abortion. I never saw him again, and the thought of him makes me sick. The thought of how I didn't look after myself and how desperate I was for attention makes me even more sick. Story 18. A toxic relationship. He kept tossing gifts at me when I was stripping, would pay just to hang out, talked me into leaving the business. He owned a bunch of lumber and real estate, so was well off. Was always a controlling asshole after we moved in together, always yelling about something. And then he got annoying and was drunk all the time. He got a DUI, and while he was locked up, I invited friends over to move all my stuff out. Changed my number, got off social media for a year. Ghosted my way out of a 3-year relationship. He hired a PI but never located me. I only know that because the guy kept coming in asking about me and the bouncer wrote down his name after IDing him and searched it and his business came up. Bouncer sent me $1 via PayPal with a note to call him. I did, and he told me that a PI was looking for me, and they originally thought it was a weirdo stalker because he came in twice a week asking employees about me. I moved in with a friend an hour and a half away and crammed to make money. Surprisingly, he never knowingly found me on there. He wasn't too technologically literate. He's married to some young girl last I checked, and since then I opened up my social media, and he hasn't bothered me in the 2 years since. Story 19. I had a sugar baby once. One weekend, she stayed the night, and at brunch the next day, she told me our vibe didn't feel like a sugar baby kind of thing, and asked me to start spending less money on her and to see her in a new light. I agreed and told her I wasn't going to bring it up out of respect, but was delighted to hear her saying that. After that, we started spending even more time together, sharing our emotions and life stories and using the L word. I learned that her mother was terminally ill, and she was using the sugar baby money to pay off the in-home nursing bills. She started taking on more hours at work instead to pay for it. In total, we dated almost a year. I did spend a lot less money on her after that conversation, but when her mother died while we were together, and I paid for a good chunk of the funeral she was struggling to afford, that time, I didn't take no for an answer. Story 20. There was that charming guy from a different part of the same state, around the same age as me. He was instantly hooked by my offer and we texted a bit. I was being polite and answered all kinds of questions to get to know clients, even though there were a lot of requests and a lot of BS by people who don't actually intend to spend money. One day, within the first month after I started doing this, I booked a cheap hotel near his area. He saw my status and asked if he could come around. I agreed. It was a blind date. He said he was a student, so he supposedly didn't have a lot of money to spend, which later turned out to be a lie, but I couldn't lose much and I was curious. Then he knocked on the door. I opened it and saw him grinning nervously and noticed a cigarette stench. I grabbed him and pulled him in, and we spent a really great evening together. He might not have been the biggest beauty to most people, but it instantly clicked, and we soon gained trust and ended up as a long-distance couple. Although not meeting that often and only briefly because we were both quite busy. And I urged him to quit smoking ASAP. Since he knew what I was doing as a side business, he obviously didn't have any problems with it. And not all the requests involve sex, often it's just kicking balls and stuff like that. About a year into the relationship, we grew apart because both of us were rather busy. But there were plans to change careers and eventually move in together. One day, he stopped responding. The next time I was in his area, he wasn't living there anymore. I later found out that he suddenly died, but no one had told me about it because no one knew we were together. Story 21. Not my story, but my brother doesn't mind when I tell it. He thinks it's hilarious. Anyway, said brother was a sex worker for about 3 years after realizing he wasn't really into the whole college thing. Our parents knew and disapproved, but he's his own person, and we trusted him to be safe or to call us if he ever needed help or support. That's all we could really offer. He was in a bad place. Thankfully, no drugs. He texted me one day to tell me he'd be out of town for a while, apparently on a trip with some of his friends to Vancouver. Nothing work-related as far as we know, but he was his own kind of entrepreneur, so I wasn't surprised to hear that he found a few jobs through friends in the area. Apparently, he went to a non-league hockey game with the intent to meet a client afterwards, and him, being a sports hater, spent most of his time talking, loudly, about how much hockey sucks. One player overheard him and caught up afterwards. Not the one he was supposed to meet, mind you, and he assumed the guy was his client. After dinner and sex, apparently the truth came out when my brother asked for payment. He called me afterwards, so I know how incredibly embarrassed he was. He'd gotten the guy's number, though, and after some time calming him down, I convinced him to give the man a call and apologize at least. And thankfully, he listened. He's my brother-in-law now, and genuinely one of the kindest, sweetest people I've ever met. As far as I've been told, the tension between them cleared up pretty quick. Brother apologized, brother-in-law accepted and asked out on another real date this time, and that was that. I've never seen two people more in love, and I'm glad it worked out for my brother. He needed the stability my brother-in-law brings to his life more than anything else. It turned out well. Story 22. I had the opposite experience. I visited an escort. The next day, she texted me if I wanted to meet her in the city. Naturally, I obliged, and we ended up back at my place. Keep meeting up with her for a few months whenever she was in town. Of course, I never paid her, except for buying her a few drinks every now and then, and obviously the first time. And we were talking about me coming to visit her in her hometown, but we ended up breaking it off eventually. Last time I spoke with her was a few months back. She told me she found someone back home and was really in love, etc. I hope things worked out for her. I've always wondered what made her contact me. I'm not even well off, and I was open about that fact. It really did seem like she actually just liked me. Incredibly beautiful, too, and we always had a good time together. Guess it worked out, though, because shortly after, I met the woman I've been with for nearly 4 years now, and we're really happy together.